Yes, and welcome to Middle-earth Talk Radio. I'm your host, Hawk, and I'm broadcasting live over Google Plus and the YouTube stream on Google Plus this September 23rd, 2012. This is episode 48 of Middle-earth Talk. For those of you who received the little notification in advance on either Facebook or Twitter or the chat room, or Google Plus. A quick rundown of topics we'll be covering today's show, and of course always welcoming feedback from others. Going to cover a little bit about Tolkien's works and music. Also a little bit on the One Ring and use of magic, and really the lack thereof, as compared to some other options. A little bit about j.r.r. Some questions with folks about Tor Online, and also Tolkien-based LARPing, and a brief bit about Tolkien PTSD, and then a little heads up about a Tolkien book called Middle-earth Minstrel, Essays on Music in Tolkien. So the main subject today is music in Tolkien. I've brought it up a number of other times with the Tolkien Society and in other shows about how crucial music is to Tolkien's creations, not just in Middle-earth, but especially in Middle-earth. Of course, he brings it up in fairy tales and others that he's written. But in Middle-earth, it has significant importance. Just the actual creation of the universe starts out with the Ainulindale, with music, with song and cacophony, and slowly becoming more structured, and the battle of the music between Morgoth's brazen horns and everybody else. So the very fabric of all of j.r.r. is based on music and song. So a real appreciation of Tolkien's works is lacking if you don't also take into account the musical aspects throughout. And a number of you already know about MiddleEarthRadio.com, where they're streaming several streams of music. One stream is for heavy metal and really upbeat, and Led Zeppelin and other. Middle-earth Radio is all Tolkien-inspired music, and so one stream is this heavy metal rock type. Another type is the mellow music, the Celtic and classical and Gregorian and other more classical pieces. And then another stream is the talk-based, which tends to be different radio shows, broadcasts, BBC audio, things like that. And one of the main resources for the music that's found on Middle-earth Radio, besides being contributed to directly by a lot of the artists, is TolkienMusic.com. It was created by Professor Chris Seaman a number of years ago. And actually, let me correct myself. According to Chris Seaman, when we interviewed him on a show 2 years ago, he actually took the list over from someone else and has maintained it for many years. But he continues to keep adding to the list any Tolkien-inspired music. And I actually found in this book that we're going to discuss a reference to his website. And it's Tolkien-music.com. And I've mentioned it many times and in many shows before. It's this long list of any Tolkien-inspired music. And also lists some that are not Tolkien-inspired but have been mistakenly thought to be Tolkien-inspired. So definitely worth checking that out if you haven't already. One of the things you may notice, the background's a little different right now. It's very cluttered in the background. And we'll get further into the topic. I'm actually down in the basement right now, and I've been building a soundproof studio gaming area down here for music and such. I'm going to see how this switches over on the other camera. I don't know if that's going to record that way, but we'll see. Okay, so I'll give you a quick little rundown here. This is where eventually future broadcasts are going to take place. You'll see I've got my large gaming collection here. That's all role-playing gaming on the shelves right there, still going. And then I have some in the other room right now because I'm still building more shelves. But the basement I haven't finished because I am building double walls with offset studs and insulating them as well. And this is in the basement, so it's extra insulated. This is also so when I set up my drums and such, I don't drive the poor neighbors crazy. There's a bunch of photography that I did when I was a professional photographer. And in the other room is the server room, where a lot of the recording equipment is going to be set up so that the machine noise will be separate from recording. So when I do broadcasts later, I'll have a lot of equipment separate. You see right now, quite a mess. I've got everything kind of crammed in here. You see that server rack, servers, more servers, tons of equipment. So eventually this is where I will move the broadcast to. This is where gaming and music will be taking place instead of upstairs. And almost done getting it insulated and sheetrocked, so that's coming along. Let me go and switch back the video here. So let's see. Okay, good. Hallian from Finland has tuned in on the irc.merp.com, and of course we have Marodim over on Tolkien Gateway IRC. Not sure if anyone on Geek and Sundry has tuned in or not, but we will see over time. Okay, so back to the topic at hand. I'll bring up some of my notes here so I don't wander around too much. Now, hopefully Michael is going to be back on the show. He's in Georgia right now. He's been kind of tooling around different places. Hopefully he'll be back on the show in a week or two. I'd hope to bring Brian Hughesland on the show, but Sundays being what they are for him, I doubt I'll be able to get him here on a Sunday. So hope you don't mind that it's just been me lately. I'll try to have some other folk on here eventually. Quick little thing on pronunciation I was corrected on last week by the folks in Finland. We changed our society name from the, let's see, what was it? The Inland Northwest USA Tolkien Society, SMEAL, to just simply EA, Tolkien Society. And that's with E and then an A with 2 dots over the A. And I've been for years pronouncing it EA. And I also have a role-playing game, Tolkien-based role-playing game called, the EARPG.com. And nobody said anything, but last week they corrected me and pointed out that it's EA. So EH, AH, rather than the AYAH. So EA versus EA. Although I think EA flows a little nicer, but apparently technically it should be EA when referring to, the entire universe of creation that Middle-earth sits in Tolkien's works. So forgive me if I slip up on that occasionally. I'm trying to make that transition, and then you'll have some idea what I'm talking about when I say Hallian's asking what's the channel for Tolkien Gateway. It's irc. I'm sorry, it wasn't. Did I say Tolkien Gateway? I'm sorry. I meant the One Ring. So sorry. I meant the One Ring. Tolkien Gateway chat room's been dead for a long time, and pretty much that's here. And then the OneRing.net is the other one I'm in. Sorry about that. I misspoke. Been a little tired this week, a little dingy, so glad you caught me on that. I can show nice. And by the way, if you have any questions in the chat room, please use my handle, TolkienMoot, or whatever it is in the chat room, MERP admin and the MERP one, so that it actually highlights it a different color, and that way it's easier for me to know that you've asked a question, and I'll be able to catch that more quickly with fewer pauses. Mentioned this before. I'm slowly working on a degree in recreation and music therapy with a research psychody emphasis, and I'm almost done with the music minor portion, and I just have some psych courses to finish the psych part. And this fall coming up, I'm taking compositional techniques and counterpoint, and so preparing for that, I start that next week, and was really thinking, okay, I got to get back in the mode of thinking of music. I have to think about music theory and Roman numeral analysis and all these. Tell you what, I found computer programming a lot easier than music theory. But maybe that's just because I wasn't raised with the music background as rich as some of the other people there in the class. But I bought this book a year or two ago, the Middle-earth Minstrel, Essays on Music and Tolkien. It's edited by Bradford Lee Eaton. And haven't had a chance to read it too much. I've skimmed through it from time to time. I pulled little tidbits of information from it from time to time, and starting to dig into it a little deeper. And just a little background about the fellow who put this together. He had a chance in 2003. He got a grant from the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and was able to go actually to the Marquette University in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and the Bodleian Library at the University of Oxford in England, and he went around to all of Tolkien's houses, etc. And he was writing a book on musical allusions in Tolkien's works. He came across at the Bodleian Library Tolkien's various drafts on a lecture entitled "The Tradition of Versification in Old English, with special reference to the Battle of Meldon and its alliteration." And there were 3 different versions of the essay, and so the author here goes into significant detail about that. But a brief tidbit from it I picked out is one can almost imagine Tolkien thinking that his love of languages and mythology helped to sing or compose Middle-earth into existence. And that's what he did, incorporating music into the creation and ultimately the history of that fascinating world all of us have come to know and love. The author here says that when one really looks at Middle-earth, the elves are the music. They're the embodiment of all that is beautiful and good, and they represent the original music of creation throughout Middle-earth's history. And I'd agree to an extent on that, although I would argue, and it doesn't negate that statement, just would also state that all of the creation is the embodiment of music, and the elves may be more closely to self-realization and actualization of that embodiment of music. The author comments about the close relationships between music and language all throughout Tolkien's writings, and itemizes some of those, and found that Tolkien's works were very influential to the point that this author started to focus a career on medievalism and culminated in a PhD in medieval musicology thanks to his love of Tolkien. He points out that the use of music as power in and of itself in the mythology is an overall theme of great importance. And this is something tying in Tolkien role-playing gaming, as I do from time to time. I have that role-playing game. And we've talked about the One Ring role-playing game, which we'll talk about briefly, on the subject of magic and music in Middle-earth. Which the One Ring pretty much role-playing game tends to pretty much avoid. It avoids covering the topic in a highly debated, complex topic, which is, so it's understandable, magic. There isn't a whole lot about magic in the One Ring role-playing game. They kind of avoid the topic. Okay, Ardemir, you have a question. So Artemir's asking, oh, you mean the author of that book found an unpublished essay by Tolkien at the Bodleian and included information about it in his book? Have to get that one then, yes. So he talks about it. I think he's referring to a different book that he did, but I recommend this book as well because actually, yeah, he has an essay later in here that I think covers a lot of that. So again, it looks like this. Middle-earth Minstrel. Bradford Lee Eaton. So that's BRADFORD space LEE space EDEN. And again, I've only been able to skim this, and I'll give you a quick rundown of some of the essays that are included here from different authors, including the author, the editor of this book. Well, before I do that, a couple other notes that I pulled out. Again, the power of music. So in the RPG, I definitely make music a key part of magic and power and such. Yeah, sorry about the beep. That would be my phone. I forgot to mute it. Points out the, let's see, the first book that came across to discuss music and Tolkien's works was The Song of Middle-earth, J.r.r. Tolkien's Themes, Symbols, and Myths by David Harvey. It's a George Allen and Unwin 1985 publication. And then there's a book by Verlyn, V-E-R-L-Y-N, Flieger, F-L-I-E-G-E-R, two books, actually, that touch on the subject as well. One is A Question of Time, J.r.r. Tolkien's Road to Faerie, Kent State University Press, 1997, and Interrupted Music, The Making of Tolkien's Mythology, Kent State University Press, 2005. So this book here that we're talking about right now, Middle-earth Minstrel, examines the impact and uses of music in Tolkien's works, relationships between linguistics and music, and even the biography of an individual who's taken Tolkien's subcreation philosophy as the basis for his life and work. So here's a couple of quick summaries of the essays contained herein. Jason Fisher explores the musical literary analogies between the kingdom of Rohan and the Anglo-Saxon kingdom of Mercia, along with musical references to the Vala Orome, the Hunter, the Ents, and the Woses. The next essay is John R. Holmes examines how the rhythms, phrasings, and sounds of philology, phonology, and music are intertwined. He illustrates these relationships through numerous examples from historical English literature and provides indications of Tolkien's use of word meanings and sounds to create a kind of, oh boy, help me with the German here, Sprechstimme, sorry if I'm butchering that, sing-song throughout his works. The themes of longing and exile are the basis for Peter Wilkins' contribution as he researches the Cottage of Lost Play texts and their subsequent replacements in The Lost Road and the Notion Club papers, especially the central character Iriel. The music, I guess is that Ariel? The music of the other world in literature and in Tolkien is compared as well. The following essay is Daryl Richards looks at the literary process Tolkien used to craft his stories, along with interesting references to psychology and philosophy. And I'm sorry about the glare on the screen here, and I need my glasses again. Let's see. And then the editors of this book, Bradford Eden, has his own contribution, which examines the Victorian leanings towards musical illusion, Tolkien's place among the Victorian medievalist writers, and a listing of some of the many unresearched musical literary themes in Tolkien's early writings. And then Diana Delmar Evans explores the relationships between the Middle English Sir Orfeo and Tolkien's construction of his Beren and Luthien tale, mentioning some of the musical connections between the two tales. And then the issue of dissonance as a theme in Middle-earth is discussed by Keith W. Jensen, as are how this theme developed from the creation myth in the Ainulindale and morphs into the issue of free will in the Silmarillion. And let's see, a couple more. The concepts of memory and mortality as they relate to music are examined by Amy M. Ament-Reduge. That's R-A-D-U-E-G-E. Has a quote from her essay, although we as readers first encounter songs of Middle-earth as poetry, Tolkien is always careful to remind us that we are, in fact, reading a song, even if we cannot hear the music. It's a profound statement, according to this author, and fundamentally true, as she discusses the many elegies and lays of Middle-earth. On a more practical level, Amy H. Sturgis recounts her educational uses of Tolkien-inspired world music, listing some of the more recent subcreational music compositions that have found their basis in Tolkien's mythology. And that's the one essay I'm going to talk about a little bit more. I've read just the first few pages of it, made some notes about it, and this is the essay that mentions Professor Chris Siemens' Tolkien Music, Tolkien-music.com website. Hallian's asked me how that German word is spelled. It is S-P-R-E-C-H-S-T-I-M-M-E, all one word. So, Sprechstimme. Not sure if that's... Yeah, I know the frame rate for Google is not very good. I'm actually recording this with a separate camera so that the recorded version will be better. Just Google Plus comes and goes, and my bandwidth comes and goes, so apologize that the frame rate's not great. I hope the audio is okay. Let's see. David Brotman looks at the role of music in Tolkien's legendarium, listing some of Tolkien's musical contemporaries and their influence on him, and then recounting recent classical, heavy metal, jazz, pop, and new age compositions and composers whose works try to musically depict many of Tolkien's themes, characters, and dramatic encounters. And again, you'll find a complete list on tolkien-music.com for that. And then finally, the book ends with a biography of S.K. Thoth, a visionary, according to this author, whose life work has its basis in Tolkien's concept of subcreation, and whose musical performances in New York City's Central Park have become legendary. Excuse me. Much of what Anthony S. Burge describes in his biography of Thoth's work is similar in concept to Nirvana or Enlightenment in Buddhism, with elements of New Age philosophies, and relates readily to concepts developed by Joseph Campbell in relation to comparative mythology and religion, as well as Campbell's succinct philosophy of follow your bliss. While this contribution would not necessarily be considered scholarly, the author included it because it illustrates the influence and power that Tolkien's works have had on many individuals, not the least of whom is Thoth. So that gives you a little bit of an overview, and I'm going to discuss in just a little bit more length one essay from that long list, the essay by Amy H. Sturgis. The title is Tolkien is the Wind and the Way, the Educational Value of Tolkien-Inspired World Music. And what it appears is this, the author of this essay, Amy H. Sturgis, this is the opening 10-page essay. Basically, it sounds like the premise of an entire course that she's teaching on Tolkien and music. And I took a few notes from the first few pages and then leave the rest for others to check out and read. So one of the first things she does is point out the other hands and minds quote that had been used, Chris Seaman used for creating Other Hands magazine, and first I created, and Thomas Whiskey helped me get off the ground, and has continued with Other Minds magazine. That's omzine.org or othermindsmagazine.com or other-minds.com will all get you to the Other Minds magazine, which is a magazine dedicated to Tolkien and gaming in Tolkien. And it's both. It's not just Tolkien gaming. There's stuff that's just a lot of interesting information about Tolkien and his works that could be used in gaming, but may not be gaming related at all. It may just be scholarly. And then other parts that are purely very much gaming in Tolkien's world, adventure modules, etc. Well worth checking out, whether you're a role-playing gamer or not. If you enjoy Tolkien and his works, you'll want to check out Other Minds magazine. I'm going to remind people in another chat room that this broadcast is underway. Since I don't think anybody in the Geek and Sundry chat room has joined yet. And remind people here as well. Give me just a moment. It'd be nice if I ever get a show producer to help kind of run the background stuff at some point instead of doing it during the show. So, for those who wanted to join, I'm on the air right now. I'm broadcasting right now. No, okay, all right. This is my youngest son, Drake.
The awesome one.
And apparently he wants to join in and watch the show. So, everybody say hello there to Drake. Okay, so a little more about this essay about Tolkien and music. So she quotes from the Other Hands in Mind letter. It's the 1951 to Milton Waldman. Quoted this many times on the show. It is the premise for RPG. It's the premise for Other Minds magazine. It's the premise for just about all the activities related to Tolkien that I've undertaken with many others. So I'll just read it again. I would draw some of the great tales in fullness, and leave many only placed in scheme and sketched. And she only quoted that portion rather than the whole portion. And then she points out how and yet leave scope for other minds and hands, wielding paint and music and drama. So, although Tolkien later abandoned this, according to this author, as ludicrous, the dream of others joining him in such participatory storytelling, clearly it's come true. Look at all the work that people have added to it with music and art and writing and gaming and movies and all of it. Definitely the inspiration has continued and seems to really be gaining momentum. That's Hallian. No, Drake is his actual name. I actually wanted to name him Draconis, but his mother had issues with that, so we compromised with Drake, which is Little Dragon instead of Big Dragon. It might be RPG influenced. You know how RPGs are a factor in my life, as if you couldn't tell from the background here. Tolkien himself, though not a musician, certainly appreciated the importance of music in building a three-dimensional fictional world. And so then she gives a number of examples. Yeah, I agree, Morrow-Dim, that Draconis would have been much more awesome. Drake feels the same way, right, Drake? You go back and forth, yeah. Some days you wish you were Draconis, other days not so much.
Other days I couldn't care less.
Right. You feel less dragon-like than some days?
Oh, dragon-like. Sleep a lot.
Okay. So she gives some examples here. In The Lord of the Rings, for instance, Tolkien assigned songs the work of key exposition in Aragorn's tale of Beren and Luthien, and in Bilbo's story of Eärendil, for example. Symbolic acts such as Treebeard's incorporation of hobbits into the Ent taxonomy, and turning points in the plotline, Sam's singing in Cirith Ungol and Frodo's reply, for example. And then we even have an idea of how Tolkien imagined some of these songs to sound, and I have this recording somewhere, and I'll try in the edited version to see if I can superimpose that here in the dialogue. I didn't have time to pull all these up in advance. I hope to in the edited version, which will hopefully be a higher quality video and audio, by the way, since I'm recording it on a separate system. The recording, he sang a few of these songs a cappella in 1952 in a taped recording, now available from Caedmon, and I bought some of these records and cassettes. That's Caedmon. I may be butchering pronunciation on that as well. It was a reading of excerpts from The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. And then in 1967, Donald Swan's composition of The Road Goes Ever On, a song cycle that was actually endorsed by Tolkien. It incorporates what Swan learned of Tolkien's personal musical inspirations, such as Gregorian chant model for Galadriel's Nomadier. And the Tolkien Ensemble has a gorgeous piece with the song to Elbereth Gilthoniel 3. They have many different versions, but it's their third version, third movement of that absolutely gorgeous piece. I played it on some shows years ago. I'm see about superimposing part of that here. And then other examples of different types of music that Tolkien used, such as the rustic tune for Sam's Rime of the Troll, fit for any working-class pub sing-along, and then the more somber liturgical sound that's assigned to the elves in Donald Swan's Nomadier. One's humble and formal and cheerful, the other aloof, mysterious, even heavenly. So again, she mentions here in the book, and I'll make sure Professor Seaman knows about this, the Tolkien-music.com website. It's proven to be an invaluable resource for exploring Tolkien-inspired world music. Some other adaptations of Tolkien-inspired music: John Desmais's The Lord of the Rings Symphony No. 1, and also David Arkenstone's music inspired by Middle-earth, and played a number of those pieces on Middle-earth Radio and Middle-earth Talk in earlier years, in earlier episodes. Of course, many know about the Led Zeppelin songs. There's at least 4 or 5 Led Zeppelin songs that directly mention Tolkien's works. The Misty Mountain Hop, Battle of Evermore, he talks about the ring wraiths are all in black. Just direct references to Tolkien. The first music composed for a successful adaptation of Tolkien's writing, and I'll use successful in quotes in this case, that's what the author listed as, appeared in the original soundtrack to the Rankin Bass animated film The Hobbit in 1977. One of the songs included Tolkien's original verses, one of the songs was "In the Valley, Ha Ha," is perhaps the most interesting from a pedagogical perspective, performed in a deliberately upbeat, folk-inspired style by singer-songwriter Glenn Yarbrough. The happy-go-lucky, laughing verses present a very different interpretation of the Rivendell elves than, for example, Ted Nasmith's art or Peter Jackson's films. Think about how much more haunting and grim those versions were. Marrodim, Glenn Yarbrough! There's a little comment there for Marrodim. And then another mention here, in 1981, the BBC radio drama of The Lord of the Rings yielded excellent music composed and conducted by Stephen Oliver. The most exceptional of these is Bilbo's last song, which is particularly significant because most students have not been exposed to its verses, as the poem was published separately from Tolkien's other Middle-earth works. The haunting song, made more ethereal by the voice of Jeremy Vine, the young treble singer, captures the mix of resignation and hope Bilbo feels while leaving Middle-earth for the Undying Lands. His conviction that he will find longed-for peace and respite highlights both the reward and the price he already has paid for being a ring-bearer for so many years. The song inspires talk about the characteristics of Bilbo as a hero in both The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, the nature of sacrifice and healing depicted in The Lord of the Rings, and the meaning of the Grey Havens and the Undying Lands, and by implication, Tolkien's presentation of mortality and immortality, which of course he goes into great length as well with the Númenórean stories. So there's more. It's about a 10-page essay, and that just gives you a little teaser of that, some interesting tidbits there.
That's missing a head.
Yes, it broke. So any comments, questions? Marrodim says she has a soft spot for that Rankin Bass album. Merd's all mixed up, balking tack words. And let's see if any others here had a quick question about that. Okay. So talking about music and a little bit about magic, and this is, we're going to be wrapping the show up before too long here. I talked about the One Ring, and certainly in the table of contents and indexes that are included with the books, there's not a single reference to magic or music in either the Adventurer's lore or the Lore Master's book. I haven't double-checked with the downloadable detailed index. I ran out of time just before the show. I could do that. To verify that. But I don't recall, as we've gone through and played the game, really anything useful about their interpretation of how to use magic in Middle-earth. I think it's pretty much, they avoided it like a landmine. And it's understandable. I mean, one of the most hotly debated topics on MERP.com and any other lists is what is and how do you define Tolkien's magic in Middle-earth? How can you represent it? How can you quantify it? And that's very problematic. It's both omnipresent and at the same time more subtle. What's that?
Magic.
Yeah, well, okay. It's complicated. And so I guess, they didn't want to get hung up on that, trying to come to press. I don't know. Hopefully in future supplements, they'll try to address that as they come out with more character classes, if you will, and try to tackle that difficult subject. In RPG, the one I've been working on, I try to attempt that, and a key part of it is music. Even just the character creation, refer to the Song of Arda. You can either create your character, if you already have one in mind, you can create your character exactly the way you want by picking and choosing. Or you can go with the Song of Arda, aka Fate, and roll, and let fate determine what kind of character you get and what kind of equipment you have, etc. So with that RPG, I incorporate music and the Song of Arda into the entire fabric of the game, as I believe the music of creation is incorporated in Tolkien's entire Middle-earth. Been working on the details of that and slowly adding more updates to it, uploading to the site. Let's see, any other topics before we wrap up? A little bit. Oh, yes, I had a link. Oh, and I was going to have this ready. Where did I put it? Somebody from last week's, or actually 2 weeks ago, I apologize for missing last week's show. I was unwell and didn't even get on the show to say that I wasn't well. Sorry about that. Somebody sent me a link, and I will include it with the uploaded, edited version of the show, on somebody who just a few days before I was talking about Tolkien and his periods of intense work and high energy, and then his periods of just collapse, and how in 1938 or 7, I forget, we were talking about the Tolkien Society, he had a nervous breakdown. His doctor diagnosed him with a nervous breakdown. He was told to take it easy in August, September, but then he cranked out a lot more work on Lord of the Rings anyway. And the question of, he has these periods of intense energy and periods of just complete exhaustion and even illness, physical illness, that keeps recurring and keeps recurring and keeps recurring. And how much of that goes back to what happened to him in World War I with trench fever, how much of it is the nature of academia, where you have these periods of relatively low intensity, and then these intense periods, midterms and finals and grading and all this work, and you've got to meet all these deadlines, and then you have the breaks, and then you have and it keeps an ebb and flow and up and down, a very manic depressive, if you will, environment. And how much that was impacting Tolkien, or how much was going on with Tolkien. And I've talked about, I hope someday to have the time to go through all his letters. I'm broadcasting to go through all his letters and try to chart his energy level, his mood level, and his health level, and see if any patterns emerge, and if they correlate to events and being at school, or if they seem to be more arbitrary. I don't know. So I was talking about that a couple shows back, and somebody sent me a link to someone who was blogging a little bit about Tolkien and some of his collapse, specifically relating more to their theory that it's PTSD. And this is someone who apparently has a doctorate already in psychology, and they talk about that at length. And I am trying to find, it was Ardemir who gave me the link. It's in the Notion Club Papers blog. Thank you, Ardemir. And that link is around here somewhere, but I didn't have time to pull it up before the show. If you have that handy, Ardemir, to hurry and paste that, I'd love to share that with folks now before I get off the air, but I understand if you don't have that handy. So it was an interesting approach. It's another perspective to look at. Certainly, untreated PTSD, they call it shell shock back then, can have lasting and lingering effects. His illness with trench fever certainly could have caused an initial cycle of health issues, and certainly his wife's health issues. And she had a number of issues there. And I'll make some people just really quickly aware, since Ardemir's posting there, we have set up a separate chat room for Ardemir's Tolkien role-playing games. See, so there's many, there's only been 3 official commercial releases of a Tolkien-inspired role-playing game. The first one being Iron Crown Enterprises Middle-earth Role-Playing, ICE MERP. The second one, Decipher's Lord of the Rings role-playing game, which was very short-lived and had its issues. And then most recently, Cubicle 7's and Sophisticated Games, the One Ring role-playing game. But meanwhile, there have been community efforts all along. I mean, it started with a lot of people just modifying Dungeons & Dragons and to fit Middle-earth. That was certainly how I started, and that's how many others did. Back in Tolkien Moot 2008, we had John D. Ratliff, author of The History of the Hobbit, and he talked about how they actively worked on a Tolkien-inspired, the Wizards of the Coast, worked on an actual licensed Tolkien-inspired role-playing game in great detail. They had mock-ups, they had rules worked out, they had a lot laid out, but it never made it to press. It never got the official licensing and such to go live. Shows how it's permeated throughout all of that, of course. And, of course, the original Dungeons & Dragons had hobbits and balrogs before they had to change them because of licensing issues. So Ardemir has his own effort as well. I have RPG, and he has Ardemart, which you can download at merp.com. And we've also set up a chat room for him, which is irc.merp.com. And then you have the pound symbol, Arda_Mard. That's ARDA_MARRED. and that's where they discuss working on the further revisions of their system. And so just a quick little letting other folk know about that, and Artemir's many great efforts on that. So any last questions before wrapping up here? Oh, and Artemir has posted the link. It's pretty little long for me to, I'll say it here quickly for those who are listening with audio only, but with the download I'll post the link. It's notionclubpapers.blogspot.com/2012/j.r.r-tolkien's-or.html. So certainly do a search for that, and that's an interesting little tidbit to read, and be curious to other people's feedback on it. It's theoretical. We don't have any way to test and verify on that except to go through what is written, and it'd be interesting to see. So getting ready to wrap up here. I think we've covered the topics. Oh, no, there were two other things. I have had a dearth of trying to find people willing to have a consistent The One Ring role-playing game session, weekly session. And I'd like to get a group together. I haven't had much luck here in Spokane, and I'd like to try an experiment of doing it online with webcam. I did this a number of years ago with See You See Me at my own reflectors, and we muddled through. We got by okay, and that was with Iron Crown Enterprises MERP. So if any of you be interested in joining me in a weekly, for a little while, or maybe semi-weekly, campaign using the One Ring role-playing game rules, you'll need to have a set of your own handy. I'd like to get a regular game going using either Google Hangout or some similar technology where we have webcams so we can see each other, and we'll be able to see each other roll the dice, what have you. And so we'll be doing tabletop role-playing, and the only computer aspect is that we're connecting to each other over the web. And like to experiment with that, at least do 2 or 3 sessions, see if we can work out the bugs and make it playable and enjoyable, at least close to the experience of being around the tabletop, or if it's just still too much of a separation, too much of a technology issue. So anybody who's interested, please contact me. It's tolkienscholars@gmail.com. That's with an S at the end. Tolkien Scholars, all one word, @gmail.com. Let me know if you'd be interested, and we can try to arrange a schedule for that. I just need 2 or 3 players to make it work, at least initially. And we'd use Google Plus or something else if we think something else would be better. It needs to be free, non-commercial. It needs to be free software, though, something that we don't have to pay for. Let me know on that. And then I had another question. And you're welcome, Artemir, for mentioning Artemir's official IRC channel. Has anybody recently? My boys have gotten a little bit into live action role playing down at a local park here. It's an Amtgard division. It's called Stormhaven, right?
Yeah.
Their branch is called Stormhaven, and it's a live action role playing group that's all across the country and maybe even the world. And I've been at SCA, Society of Creative Anachronism, before, and that's a little different. And SCA is much more brutal. They have much stricter rules about the equipment you wear. It has to be really steel and protective, and the eye pieces have to be a certain way so that something doesn't get in and take your eye out, because people over the decades had been seriously hurt or even killed. And they beat on each other, and you walk away black and blue. Although some nice aspects of the SCA is it isn't just fighter. They have fighter practice, but they also have medieval dances. They have feasts. I helped at one point with preparing a feast. And then they have their huge battles, etc. That was SCA. So SCA isn't just battle-centric. I didn't get into the battle part as much. I ended up just being more of a minstrel type. I played my guitars and such, and 12-string, and there's a fellow there who built his own lute and would play, and we would do kind of medieval style music. And so it isn't technically role-playing, even though you do create a persona, but it's meant to be more realistic. They try to be historically accurate with the SCA. Crafters, artisans, game players, they have all kinds. They're doing everything they can to kind of recreate all the different activities from a medieval overlapping Renaissance time period. And it isn't limited to just European medievalism. There are people who are doing Japanese medieval feudal periods and Chinese medieval feudal periods. Artemir's asking me, have I heard about the One Ring Adventures, the One Ring Radio Play Adventure combination? No, I don't know anything about that. Please elaborate. With the SCA, again, fighter practice is much more brutal, but they have a lot of other activities, but they tend to try to focus more on realism. There's no magic. It isn't fantasy role setting. It's meant to be historically accurate. Enter LARP, where they have softer equipment, so that it's rare that you get any bruises. You don't have to wear any actual armor. And armor that you wear is more for symbolic purposes than actual protection. It may help a little, but it's mostly just representative rather than actual.
Yeah, it's representative. People
you don't have to wear big steel plates and everything to get the protection. So,
well, people hate it when you use cardboard.
Okay. Okay. But anyway, what I noticed there is not only do they have the combat, but they also mix up the combat. In SCA, it's mostly just beat on each other, or they might have big battles, but they don't have a lot of different combat activities. With the Amped Guard LARP, they have many different combat activities, and this is a fantasy setting, so magic is actually involved, and not in reality, but simulated. You fill up little things and throw them at each other like fireballs and such, whatever.
Entangle is annoying.
Entangle is annoying. So you have to stay in place. And there's a lot of, on your honor in it. And he's had a lot of fun, and it's been very active. They do it from about noon to 4:30, 5 o'clock up at, which park is it here? South Hill and Spokane. Manitou Park. Every week they're there. And so it's much more accessible and less brutal. So if you want to be more involved in the combat without having to walk away with bruises and a huge investment like SCA, that's something to consider with the LARPing, and if you want to have more fantasy, etc., available. The reason why I bring this up, but one other last thing before I go to that. The downside that I've seen so far, though, is all they have is combat. Although they mix it up, they have different games. They have Kill Your Killer, they have Ring the Bell, Capture the Flag. They really mix it up so it's many different activities, keep it more interesting. So that's a lot of fun. But the reason why I bring this up, no, hang on, not there yet, I'm tired. But what I would say is they don't have other activities. I didn't see anybody doing music, artisan, craftsmanship, other stuff. I didn't see any actual role-playing outside of just you have a character that you build levels and you do combat and you gain equipment and such. And it reminded me more of a Morpag or a computer-based role-playing game where it's much more combat-centric in LARPing, whereas SCA wasn't as much combat-centric. So they have campouts that you get to do non-combat-centric activities? Because it still sounded like they were combat-centric.
Some of them have storylines.
Yeah, I understand they have storylines with quests and such, but do they have anything that, if you're not a combatant type, let's say you're a non-combatant bard, do you have activities? Sure. Let's say you're a cook. Let's say your abilities are in craftsmanship and artisanship. What do you do? You have nothing to do, right? SCA, you'd have activities. You have group activities.
I've only been there twice.
I know. You've only been there twice, and so we don't know. And if we're wrong, please let us know. But that being said, now finally to why I bring it up, has anybody engaged in any Tolkien LARP? Is there an official Tolkien live-action role-playing group, rules, anything like that? I don't know. I haven't really done a search yet on it because the thought just occurred to me today. Curious if anybody knows about that. And people may have just done that individually, but is there an organization that does Tolkien LARPing? And that being said, it's fine if they have combat, but I'd really like to find out about anything that involves more role-playing and less combat-centric, even though it needs to have the combat rules and engage in that, but a broader range of actual role-playing and other activities. So if you want to just play a merchant, or if you want to play a craftsman, or a cook or a musician, there's a place for you to engage in the activities as you have with the SCA, but in a Tolkien setting. So, question for everybody out there. Let me know. I'd love to know. And again, you can email TolkienScholars@gmail.com or Middle-earth Radio@gmail.com, either one. Or you just go to the website, MiddleEarthTalk.com, and you can post there, and I enable comments on the show information. Any last-minute questions for wrap up? This actually went a lot longer than I expected. I hope wasn't rambling on too much for you. Hope it was enjoyable. Looks like... Okay, so I haven't heard back from Artemir about the One Ring Adventures, the Tor Radio Play Adventure combination. I have talked about the One Ring Adventures. We showcased that in a previous episode, Adventures in Wilderland. If you go back one or actually I think just the previous show, or maybe two back, I go into detail. I went over, and I think in fact maybe you're talking about something else, not Adventures in Wilderland. Maybe it's something else. I'd be curious to know more about that. But I need to wrap up the show. Run a bit long. Hope it wasn't too disjointed, rambling, and bloviated.
But those are the best shows.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm glad you think so. Morodium says, no questions, and no, you don't sound like you're rambling. Okay, great. Well, then, we'll call it a wrap then for tonight, if nobody has any last-minute questions, comments. Okay. So thank you, everybody, for participating here every Sunday, noon, Pacific time, on Google Plus, broadcasting live. You can join in. You can find us through Google Plus at tolkienscholars@gmail.com. And then the recorded shows we upload both to YouTube, so it's youtube.com/Middle-earth Radio, and also the live shows are there, youtube.com/Middle-earth Radio. But often I then put more edited, higher quality videos on our actual website, middleearthtalk.com, especially since I ran an issue when we were showing little snippets of stuff, and YouTube started to try to commercialize the videos and stick ads in it. So I pulled out those segments and put the show just on our website rather than YouTube. So I'll still keep putting things on YouTube, but I'm going to be trending more towards putting it on our own website, the edited versions. The unedited versions we'll leave on youtube.com indefinitely. And if you have questions for upcoming shows or topics you'd like to see me cover, please let me know. Hopefully next week or maybe the week after, Michael Martinez should be back on the show. And this is Hawk and Drake. Thank you for joining in. And many thanks to those of you online who participated. Wherever you may be well. Namarie.